Don't come to the wedding. You'll embarrass us." I stared at those words on my phone screen, reading them over and over, waiting for them to change into something else. Something that made sense. Something that didn't feel like a knife between my ribs. But they didn't change. My daughter Jessica had sent them at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Not even a phone call, just a text message. Cold. Final. Like she was uninviting me from a casual dinner party, not her wedding. I'm Claire, and I'm 68 years old. I've lived through a divorce, built 2 businesses from nothing, raised a daughter on my own, and buried more dreams than I care to count. I thought I'd seen every kind of hurt life could throw at me. I was wrong. Before I tell you what happened next, let me ask, where are you watching this from? Drop your city or state in the comments. I'd love to know who's listening to this story, because what I'm about to share isn't just about revenge. It's about recognizing your own worth when the people you love most can't see it. Let me take you back 6 months before that text message arrived. Jessica had been dating Brandon for about 3 years. He was 32, charming in that practiced way that some men are, with perfect teeth and a firm handshake. He worked in tech consulting, or at least that's what he told everyone at family dinners. The truth was a little more complicated. Brandon had a startup, one of those ventures that sounds impressive when you say it fast, something about AI-driven marketing analytics for small businesses. He had a small office in a co-working space downtown, 2 employees who were barely getting paid, and a lot of expensive suits that gave the impression of success he hadn't actually achieved yet. I knew this because 2 years ago, Brandon had come to me with a proposal. It was a Sunday afternoon. Jessica had brought him to my house for lunch, and after we'd eaten, she'd gone to the store to pick up dessert. Brandon had asked to speak with me privately. "Claire," he'd said, sitting across from me in my living room, his laptop open on the coffee table between us. "I know this might seem forward, but I wanted to talk to you about an investment opportunity." I should have said no right then, but he'd shown me spreadsheets, projections, market analysis. He'd talked about scalability and customer acquisition costs and runway. And underneath all that business jargon, I'd heard something else: ambition, drive. The same hunger I'd had when I was younger, trying to make something of myself. More than that, though, I'd seen the way Jessica looked at him, like he hung the moon, like he was her future. And I'd thought, maybe foolishly, that helping him succeed would be helping her build the life she wanted. So I'd invested, not a small amount either. Over the course of 2 years, I'd put $473,000 into Brandon's company. It was money from the sale of my second business, money I'd planned to use for retirement, for travel, for the comfortable later years I'd worked so hard to earn. Instead, I'd bet it on my daughter's happiness. The investment wasn't a gift. I want to be clear about that. We'd signed papers, drew up contracts. Brandon had given me a 32% equity stake in his company, and we'd agreed on quarterly reports and regular updates. For the first year, everything seemed promising. The company was growing slowly but steadily. Brandon would send me detailed emails about client acquisitions, product development, new hires. Jessica was happy. She'd started talking about marriage, about starting a family, about buying a house together. I'd felt good about my decision, like I was building something for my daughter's future, even if she didn't fully understand the foundation I was helping create. But somewhere in the second year, things started to shift. The updates became less frequent. The quarterly reports arrived late, then later, then not at all. When I'd ask Brandon about the business over family dinners, he'd give vague answers about pivoting and restructuring and market challenges. Jessica would shoot me warning looks across the table, like I was being intrusive, like I was an overbearing mother who couldn't let her daughter's relationship breathe. I'd backed off. Told myself it was none of my business how they ran things. Told myself that questioning Brandon would create tension with Jessica, and our relationship was already delicate enough. But I'd kept the paperwork, kept the contracts, kept every email, every bank transfer, every document that proved my investment was real and legally binding. I'm not sure why I'd been so meticulous about it. Maybe some instinct I couldn't name had warned me to protect myself. Maybe I'd learned from my divorce that love and trust are beautiful things, but documentation is what saves you when everything falls apart. 6 months before the wedding, Jessica had called to tell me they'd set a date. June 14th, a Saturday. She'd been so excited, talking fast about venues and flowers and bridesmaids' dresses. "I want you involved in everything, Mom," she'd said. "This is going to be so special." And I'd believed her. I'd helped her find the venue, a beautiful garden estate about an hour outside the city. I'd gone to dress fittings, sitting in boutiques while she tried on white gowns, crying happy tears when she found the perfect one. I'd met with caterers, reviewed invitation designs, discussed seating arrangements. I'd written a check for $18,000 to cover the deposit on the venue when Jessica and Brandon had a temporary cash flow issue. Another $12,000 for the photographer they absolutely had to have, $6,000 for the flowers. I'd done it gladly, happily. Because watching my daughter plan her wedding, seeing her so full of hope and joy, had felt like watching every sacrifice I'd made as a single mother finally bloom into something beautiful. I thought I was giving her the wedding of her dreams. I hadn't realized I was funding a performance where I wouldn't even be allowed in the audience. The first real warning sign came 3 months before the wedding. I'd arrived at Jessica's apartment for a planning session we'd scheduled weeks earlier. She'd said we were going to finalize the menu selections, and I'd been looking forward to it. Just a mother and daughter afternoon, making decisions together, building memories. When I'd knocked on the door, Jessica had answered with a strange expression. Not quite guilty, but close. Uncomfortable. "Mom," she'd said, "I didn't think you'd actually come." "We scheduled this 2 weeks ago," I'd reminded her, confused. "For the menu tasting?" "Oh, right. The thing is, Brandon's mother is here, and we already kind of started without you." I'd stood there in the hallway, holding a folder of notes I'd prepared, feeling something cold settle in my chest. "You started without me?" Carolyn had some really specific ideas about the food, and since she's, helping with costs and everything, we thought we should probably defer to her preferences. Helping with costs, as if I hadn't been bankrolling major portions of this wedding for months. But I'd smiled, swallowed the hurt, told Jessica it was fine, we could catch up another time. I'd driven home in silence, gripping the steering wheel too tight, telling myself I was being oversensitive, that modern weddings involved multiple families, multiple opinions, that I needed to be more flexible. But that was when things started to change more noticeably. Suddenly, Carolyn, Brandon's mother, was at every wedding planning event. The cake tasting I'd been excited about, Carolyn was there, making decisions about flavors and tiers, while I sat quietly at the end of the table. The final dress fitting. Carolyn had opinions about the alterations while I watched from a chair in the corner. Jessica stopped calling me to discuss decisions. She'd tell me about them after they'd been made. Carolyn thought the blush roses would be more elegant than the white ones you suggested. Brandon's mom found an amazing DJ, so we went with him instead. Carolyn convinced us to do a sit-down dinner instead of the buffet. She says it's more sophisticated. Every time I'd nod, smile, tell Jessica that sounded lovely, because what else could I do? Complain? Demand recognition for the money I'd spent? Fight with my daughter over wedding plans and make everything worse? I'd stayed quiet, stayed supportive, showed up when I was invited and gracefully backed away when I wasn't. But inside, something was hardening. 2 months before the wedding, I'd been removed from the main family group chat, the one where all the wedding updates and decisions were being discussed. Jessica had created a new, smaller one that didn't include me. When I'd asked her about it, she'd said, "It was just getting too many people, Mom, too chaotic. Don't worry, I'll keep you updated on anything important." But she hadn't. I'd learned about the rehearsal dinner location from a cousin who'd asked if I was excited about the restaurant they'd chosen. I'd had to pretend I knew what she was talking about, then look it up later. I discovered that the wedding party had been finalized, and my suggestion for Jessica's childhood friend to be a bridesmaid had been quietly ignored when I'd seen photos on social media. I'd been slowly, systematically edited out of my own daughter's wedding planning. And the terrible thing? I'd let it happen. I told myself it was her day, her choices, her life. 1 month before the wedding, I'd decided to do something I'd been avoiding for weeks. I'd called my attorney, Richard, the same one who'd handled my business contracts for years. "I need you to look into something for me," I'd said, quietly. "What's going on, Claire?" "I invested a significant amount of money in my future son-in-law's company. I haven't received financial reports in 8 months. I want to know what's actually happening with my investment." Richard had been silent for a moment. "Are we talking about the investment in the tech startup? The one you told me about a couple years ago?" "Yes." "Claire, I advised you against that investment. I told you mixing family and business was—" "I know what you told me, Richard. Can you look into it or not?" He'd sighed. "I'll see what I can find out." 3 weeks later, he'd called me back. "Claire, we need to meet in person. Are you free tomorrow?" Something in his tone had made my stomach drop. "That bad?" "Tomorrow, my office, 10 a.m. I'd sat in Richard's office the next morning, watching him arrange papers on his desk, preparing to tell me something he clearly didn't want to say. "The company is hemorrhaging money," he'd finally said. "Brandon's burned through almost all of your investment. The business model isn't viable. His client retention is abysmal. He's been using new investment money to pay operating expenses, which means he's essentially running a very slow, very legal-looking Ponzi scheme." I'd felt numb. "How much is left?" "Of your initial investment, maybe $60,000, and that's only if you could liquidate your equity position, which would be difficult given the company's current state. $400,000. Gone." "There's more," Richard had continued. "Brandon's been shopping for additional investors. He's using the wedding, your daughter's wedding, as a networking opportunity. He's invited several potential investors to the ceremony. That's why the guest list expanded so dramatically in the last 2 months. My daughter's wedding, the one I'd helped pay for, being used as a business development event." "What are my options?" I'd asked. Richard had leaned back in his chair. "Legally, you could call the note. Your investment contract has a clause that allows you to demand repayment or force a company restructuring if financial reporting requirements aren't met. He's violated those terms repeatedly. And if I did that, the company would have to declare bankruptcy. Brandon doesn't have the cash to repay you. Everything would collapse." I'd sat there, absorbing this information, feeling something shift inside me. My daughter was marrying a man who'd taken my money, squandered it, lied about it, and was now using the wedding I'd helped fund as a business opportunity. And she'd been pushing me further and further away, making room for his mother, treating me like an inconvenient obligation instead of the woman who'd given her everything. "Don't do anything yet," I'd told Richard. "Let me think about this." I'd driven home that day with my hands shaking, my mind racing. And then, 2 weeks later, at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, my phone had buzzed with a text message. "Don't come to the wedding. You'll embarrass us." I'd called her immediately. My hands were trembling so badly I almost dropped the phone. It rang 4 times before she answered. "Mom, I can't really talk right now." "Jessica, did you just uninvite me to your wedding?" A pause. I heard voices in the background, Brandon's voice, and another woman's, Carolyn. "Look, can we discuss this tomorrow? It's late and—" "No, we're discussing this right now. You just sent me a text message telling me not to come to your own wedding because I'll embarrass you. I think I deserve an explanation that's not delivered via text at midnight." I heard her sigh. That particular sigh that told me I was being difficult, being too much, being the overbearing mother she'd apparently decided I was. Brandon's mother thinks it would be better if the family dynamics were simpler. She's concerned that having too many parents there might make things awkward for the photos and the seating arrangements. Too many parents? Jessica, I'm your mother. I raised you by myself. I've been involved in every aspect of this wedding planning until you started cutting me out, and now you're telling me I'm not invited because Brandon's mother thinks I'll make things awkward? It's not just her, Mom. Brandon and I have talked about it, and we think maybe it's better if you sit this one out. You've been kind of negative lately, critical. We want the day to be positive and drama-free. Negative, critical. I'd spent $40,000 on her wedding, 2 years funding her fiancé's failing business, decades raising her alone, working 2 jobs, sacrificing everything to give her opportunities I'd never had. And I was the negative one. Jessica, I'd said very quietly, very calmly, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Is this truly what you want? Are you absolutely certain you want to uninvite your mother from your wedding? I knew you'd make this into some huge, dramatic thing. This is exactly why we thought it was better to just answer the question. Is this what you want? Another pause. Longer this time. Yes, she'd finally said. I think it's what's best. Understood, I'd said. Goodbye, Jessica. I'd hung up before she could say anything else, and then I'd sat in my dark living room for a very long time, that word echoing in my head. Understood, not I'll think about it, not can we discuss this, not how dare you. Just understood, because I'd finally understood something very clearly. My daughter had chosen her new family over me. She'd chosen Brandon and his mother and their vision of the perfect wedding over the woman who'd given her everything. She decided I was an embarrassment, a complication, something to be managed and eventually removed. And if that's who she'd chosen to be, then I knew exactly who I needed to be. At 6:47 a.m. the next morning, I'd send an email to Richard. Call the note. Do it today. I want everything in motion before noon. By 7:30, Richard had called back. Claire, are you absolutely sure about this? This will destroy Brandon's company. The wedding is in 2 weeks. I'm sure, I'd said. Send the documentation. Richard had done exactly as I'd asked. By 9:15 a.m., Brandon's business email had received a formal notice of default from my attorney. The letter was clear and legally airtight. He had violated the terms of our investment agreement by failing to provide required financial reports for 3 consecutive quarters. As per the contract, I was exercising my right to call the note immediately. He had 72 hours to repay the full investment amount, $473,000, or I would force the company into involuntary bankruptcy and liquidate assets to recover my funds. I knew he didn't have the money. Richard's investigation had confirmed that. What Brandon had was a failing business propped up by my investment, expensive office furniture he'd purchased with my money, and a wedding in 2 weeks that he couldn't afford without the next round of investor funding he'd been hoping to secure at the ceremony. My phone started ringing at 9:47, Brandon's name flashing on the screen. I declined the call. He called again. Declined. Then Jessica called. Declined. 6 more calls from Brandon, 2 from Jessica, 1 from a number I didn't recognize, probably Carolyn. I declined them all. At 10:30, my phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. Mom, what are you doing? Brandon says you're trying to destroy his company? This is insane. Call me back right now. I didn't respond. Another text. You're being completely unreasonable. This is ridiculous. We need to talk about this like adults. Like adults. The irony wasn't lost on me. If you're enjoying this story and want to hear more like it, please hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this unfolds. At 11:15, Brandon sent me an email, a long, rambling message about misunderstandings and family and how we needed to work together, how he was sure we could find a solution that worked for everyone, how he valued our relationship and appreciated everything I'd done for him and Jessica. He didn't mention the wedding invitation he'd supported taking away from me. He didn't apologize for the missing financial reports. He didn't acknowledge that he'd spent nearly $500,000 of my retirement money on a business that was circling the drain. He just wanted me to back off so his life could continue as planned. I forwarded the email to Richard without responding. By noon, my phone was ringing constantly. I'd turned off the ringer and watched the notifications pile up. 17 missed calls, 34 text messages, 3 voicemails I hadn't listened to. At 2 p.m., Richard called from his office line. "Claire, Brandon's attorney just called me. They're asking if you'd be willing to meet and discuss terms. They want to negotiate a settlement." "What kind of settlement?" "They're proposing you convert your equity to a promissory note with a 5-year repayment plan. Basically, they want you to become a creditor instead of an owner and give Brandon 5 years to pay you back in installments." "With what money? You told me the business is failing." "It is, which means this is a stalling tactic. He's hoping to find new investors, keep the company afloat, and eventually pay you back. It's a gamble." "What are the odds he succeeds?" Richard had paused. "Honestly, almost 0. "Tell them no," I'd said. "The terms stand. 72 hours. "Claire, I have to ask one more time. Are you prepared for the fallout? This will likely end the relationship with your daughter, possibly permanently." I'd looked out my window at the garden I'd planted years ago. Roses I'd nursed through hard winters. Perennials that came back stronger every spring because I'd given them strong roots and proper care. My daughter uninvited me from her wedding via text message because her future mother-in-law thinks I'm an embarrassment, I'd said quietly. She chose a man who's been lying to both of us for 2 years. She's built her future on a foundation of my money and his deception, and she doesn't even know it. The relationship you're worried about me losing, it's already gone, Richard. I'm just acknowledging the truth. "Understood," he'd said. "I'll inform them the terms are final." That evening, Jessica had shown up at my house. I'd heard her car in the driveway, heard her footsteps on my porch, heard her key turning in the lock, the emergency key I'd given her years ago that she'd apparently never returned. "Mom," she'd called out, walking into my living room without knocking. "Mom, we need to talk. You can't hide from this." I'd been sitting in my reading chair with a cup of tea, perfectly calm. "I'm not hiding, Jessica. I'm simply not answering phone calls from people who've made it clear I'm not welcome in their lives." She'd stood there in my living room, looking so much like the little girl she'd been, but her eyes were different now, harder, more calculating. "You're trying to destroy Brandon's company right before our wedding. How is that not hiding? How is that not revenge?" "I'm calling a legal note that Brandon defaulted on. That's not revenge. That's business." "This is because I uninvited you to the wedding, isn't it? You're punishing me for setting a boundary." "A boundary? That's what she was calling it." "Jessica, did Brandon tell you how much money I invested in his company?" She'd hesitated. "Some. I know you helped him get started." $473,000 over 2 years, money from the sale of my business, money I'd saved for retirement. I'd watched her face carefully, seen the surprise there, the shock. "He said you'd invested maybe 100,000. He lied, just like he's been lying about the quarterly reports he was contractually obligated to provide, just like he's been lying about how well the business is doing. Did you know he's been using the wedding as a networking event? That half the expanded guest list is potential investors he's trying to court? That's business development, Mom. That's smart. That's using our family event, an event I helped pay for, as a sales opportunity. That's turning your wedding into a business transaction." She'd shaken her head. "You're twisting everything. You're trying to make Brandon look bad because you can't accept that I'm building a life with someone else." "No, Jessica. I'm trying to show you who you're actually marrying. Brandon's company is failing. He's burned through almost all of my investment. In 6 months, maybe a year, everything is going to collapse anyway." "You don't know that," she'd said, but her voice had wavered. "Richard investigated. The business model doesn't work. Brandon's been using new investment money to cover operating costs. It's unsustainable. So you're destroying it before he has a chance to turn it around? You're sabotaging his business because I hurt your feelings?" I'd set down my teacup very carefully. "Let me be very clear about something, Jessica. I invested that money because I believed in Brandon's potential and because I wanted to help build a foundation for your future together. I continued investing even when the reports stopped coming, even when the updates became vague and infrequent, because I trusted you both. I helped pay for your wedding even as you progressively cut me out of the planning because I loved you and wanted you to be happy. Then why are you doing this now? Because you looked me in the eye, or rather, you sent me a text message and told me I wasn't welcome at your own wedding. You told me I would embarrass you. You chose Brandon's mother over your own. And in that moment, I realized something important. I'd stood up, walked to my desk, and pulled out a folder. Inside were copies of every contract, every bank transfer, every email exchange with Brandon. I realized that love without respect is worthless, that sacrifice without appreciation is just self-destruction, and that I taught you to treat me this way by accepting poor treatment for so long. I'd held out the folder. This is every piece of documentation regarding my investment in Brandon's company, every contract he signed, every promise he made, every report he failed to deliver. I want you to read it, all of it. And then I want you to ask Brandon to explain why none of these numbers match what he's been telling you. Jessica hadn't taken the folder. I'm not going to help you sabotage my fiancé's business, Mom. I'm not asking you to sabotage anything. I'm asking you to look at the truth. The contract gave Brandon 72 hours to repay the investment or provide adequate collateral. That deadline is approaching. If he can't meet it, the company will be forced into bankruptcy. Not because I'm being vindictive, but because that's what happens when you default on a legal contract. You could extend the deadline. You could work with him. You're choosing not to. You could have not uninvited your mother to your wedding. You could have shown appreciation for the financial support I've provided. You chose not to. We all make choices, Jessica. We all live with consequences. She'd stared at me with something like hatred in her eyes. If you do this, if you go through with this, we're done. I will never forgive you. Then we're already done, I'd said quietly, because I will never forgive myself if I continue to accept being treated as disposable by my own daughter. She'd left without another word. I'd sat back down with my tea and waited. The deadline expired at 9:00 a.m. on Thursday morning. Brandon didn't have the money. Of course he didn't. At 9:47 a.m., Richard called. It's done. I've filed the bankruptcy petition. Brandon's company is officially in receivership. The implosion was faster than I'd expected. By noon on Thursday, Brandon's 2 employees had been informed the company was closing. By 2 p.m., word had spread among the investor community he'd been courting. By 4 p.m., his business social media accounts had gone dark. By Friday morning, the wedding venue had called Jessica to confirm final payment that was supposed to come from Brandon's business account as soon as his next funding round closed. Except there was no funding round. There was no business account. There was just a bankrupt company and a man who'd built his life on borrowed money and false promises. Jessica called me Friday afternoon, not to apologize, to blame. The wedding is off, she'd said, her voice cold and flat. Brandon can't afford it anymore. His investors backed out when they heard about the bankruptcy. Everything is falling apart. I hope you're happy. I'm not happy, Jessica. I'm heartbroken. But not because the wedding is off. You did this. You destroyed everything out of spite. No, I protected myself from someone who was using me. Brandon destroyed his own company by lying and mismanaging my investment. I simply stopped enabling it. He was building something. He was trying. And you couldn't stand that he didn't need you anymore, so you tore it all down. That had struck a nerve. The unfairness of it. The absolute refusal to see reality. Brandon didn't need me? I'd said, my voice sharper than I'd intended. Jessica, his entire business was funded by my money. The office, the employees, the equipment, all of it came from my investment. And your wedding? The $40,000 I contributed? That came from the same place. A mother who loved her daughter enough to sacrifice her retirement savings. You're not sacrificing anything now, though, are you? You're just taking and destroying. I'm reclaiming what's mine. There's a difference. I'll never forgive you for this. You've made that clear, but answer me one question. Did you know? Did you know how much money I'd actually invested in Brandon's company? Silence on the other end. Did Brandon tell you the truth about the business finances? About why the quarterly report stopped? About any of it? More silence. He didn't, did he? I'd said softly. You're defending someone who lied to both of us, and you're making me the villain because it's easier than admitting you didn't want to see the truth. I have to go, she'd said. I have to figure out how to tell 200 people that the wedding is canceled. Jessica. But she'd already hung up. I'd sat there holding my phone, feeling the weight of what I'd done. Not regret, exactly, but grief. The kind that comes from recognizing that some relationships can't be saved, only survived. The wedding would have been this Saturday. Instead, Jessica spent that day returning gifts and canceling contracts. Brandon moved back in with his mother. His LinkedIn profile changed from founder and CEO to seeking new opportunities. The bankruptcy trustee is still working through the company's remaining assets. Richard estimates I'll recover maybe $70,000 of my original investment. The rest is gone. But I got something more valuable than money back. I got my dignity. I got the knowledge that I'm not someone who can be used and discarded without consequence. I got the certainty that I taught my daughter an important lesson, even if she hates me for it right now, that actions have consequences, and that choosing partners who lie and manipulate will eventually cost you everything. 3 months have passed since the wedding that never happened. Jessica hasn't spoken to me since that last phone call. I've sent her 2 messages, short, simple ones that say I love her and that my door is always open when she's ready to talk. She hasn't responded. I've heard through mutual acquaintances that she and Brandon are still together, though the relationship is strained. Apparently, Carolyn isn't as enthusiastic about supporting them now that Brandon doesn't have a business or prospects. Funny how that works. I've also heard that Jessica got a new job, a better one, with actual benefits and stability. She's renting a small apartment by herself. Brandon is still consulting and networking, which I suspect means he's unemployed and running out of options. Part of me wants to reach out, to help her, to make sure she's okay. But I've learned something important through all of this. You can't save people who don't want to be saved. You can't force someone to see the truth when they're committed to believing a lie. And you can't sacrifice yourself endlessly hoping that eventually someone will appreciate what you've given. My investment in Brandon's company taught me that lesson in the most expensive way possible. But my daughter's text message, "Don't come to the wedding, you'll embarrass us," taught me something even more valuable. It taught me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people experience the full consequences of their choices. Not to punish them, but to stop protecting them from reality. Jessica chose Brandon. She chose his lies over my honesty. She chose his mother's approval over my love. She chose a fantasy of success over the difficult truth of who he actually was. And when I stopped funding that fantasy, it collapsed. Not because I'm cruel, but because it was never real to begin with. I don't know if Jessica and I will ever repair our relationship. Maybe someday she'll understand why I did what I did. Maybe she'll realize that the mother who pulled her investment wasn't trying to hurt her, but trying to show her the difference between genuine support and enabling destruction. Or maybe she'll hate me forever. Either way, I can live with my decision. Because for the first time in 2 years, I'm not funding someone else's dreams at the expense of my own dignity. I'm not accepting poor treatment because I'm afraid of losing love that was already conditional. I'm just Claire, 68 years old, $400,000 poorer in my bank account, but infinitely richer in self-respect. And if my daughter ever decides she wants a relationship with the woman who loves her enough to let her fall, who respects her enough to tell her the truth, who values herself enough to walk away from mistreatment, even from her own child, I'll be here. But I won't be funding any more fantasies. Not for her, not for anyone, not ever again.